Well, you honor us by being here today, and we are more than pleased to be here to talk of the Battle of Shiloh, the battle that really should never have happened. One that I certainly did not want to happen. But before we talk about that, I would like to recognize General Wade Hampton. General Hampton has joined us. General Hampton from South Carolina is already distinguishing himself and complimented with the cavalry, and we are honored with his appearance from west to hear what happened here, General. Thank you. And then we got Beauregard.
I said we did not get in this, but don't get it. I'll throw down the gauntlet in front of you.
That really worries me, General.
Did it 4:30 this morning.
For the purposes of discussing this battle and some aspects of it, since General Beauregard was involved in attacking me and making the first move, I think it only appropriate that General Beauregard should begin our discussion this morning. General Beauregard.
We're going to start it, we're going to finish it.
Indeed.
Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse me if I'm not able to project my voice today. I'm still recovering from a throat surgery from Virginia. By the time the battle opens up at 4:30, you will hear from General Brett. He will attest that he was not surprised, that he was shocked that I attacked early this morning. Our men are victorious upon the field. The Federals are running in all directions. They are now shirking on the banks of the Pittsburgh Landing. You can hear the moans and the screams and the cries of the men. Sherman himself said when we attacked, "My God, we're being attacked." Now that sends a message right there. They were surprised. By the time of the afternoon, Confederates are focused on a center point known as the Hornet's Nest. Now my role at this time has been delegated to the rear, sending troops to where they are needed. Johnston is in command. And I asked Johnson that an Army commander should be behind the men, leading the men. Instead, he's out front, leading regiments. But he should have allowed those regimental commanders to lead those men in. Sometime that afternoon, Johnson will be wounded, not knowing that he was wounded. He catches a mini ball behind the back of the knee from an old wound that he had that had paralyzed those nerves in that leg. He did not know he was bleeding to death. I received word that Johnston has passed away, and I gave the order to keep it secret for the morale of the Army, and I would assume command on the second half of the day. I was originally given the task of coming up with the plan for the Shiloh attack. The attack called for a maneuver to separate Grant from the river. If we could separate Grant from the river, that would cut off his line of communication, his line of supply, and potentially reinforcements. The latest information I've received before we called for the attack to begin, that Buell was anywhere from 2 to 3 days away. Remember that, 2 to 3 days away. So when we launched the attack, numbers were pretty much equivalent. Now, just before the attack began, since I came up with the plan, when we saw what was taking place, with the skirmishers firing early, I just knew the element of surprise was lost. And I tried to persuade Johnson that we need to call off this attack. And Johnson said, I would fight them if there was 1,000,000 of them. We'll water our horses into Tennessee by this afternoon. When the attack started, I became fully committed. The Federals were on the run. We overtook Sherman's camps. The only problem was Johnson became so enthralled about the center at a place called the Hornet's Nest that was holding. I asked the general, go around. The key now is to separate Grant from that river, push him into the Owl and Lid Creeks. If we can do that, he'll have no choice but to surrender. The problem was the left flank was moving faster than the right. We were having great success on the left flank. But on the right, where Colonel Forrest was scouting, so many ravines, regiments were being poured into there. It didn't take much for the Federals to hold those positions. By the end of the first day, I called a halt. The Army was disorganized, regiments were intermingled, brigades did not know who was in command. It was too dark. There had never been a night fight that was successful. So I felt it was time to hold the lines, reorganize the men, restructure the lines, and finish up on the second day. Of course, by the second day, Grant had been reinforced by Buell, which he will probably attest that he had already won the battle before Buell had gotten there. But Buell made a difference. He had fresh troops. Now my men, keep this in mind, in the back of your minds. They marched out of Corinth with 3 days' rations. The original plan called for us to attack on the 1st. But because of rain and mud, troops that were untrained, confusion with the order of the line of march, this was delayed. 3 days' rations did not last very long. A lot of the men were eating as they marched through the mud. What should have been a day's march turned into pretty much 4 days. So by the time that they attack the Federal lines and they have the Yankees skedaddling, when they go through the camps, we caught the Federals, as it was, making breakfast. So naturally, as they went through the camps, what did they do? Stop and began to eat breakfast. That night when I called a halt, those men, whatever rations they could get from the Federal camps, they were cooking that night, trying to rest. But that Federal Navy kept them up all night long. It was storming. The gunboats were shelling the lines. Come morning, those poor boys, they may have gotten what little sleep, an hour or so. And then the cry came that Buell is coming. But I have you to know, those boys, they didn't run. They didn't show their backs to the enemy. They slowly fell back to overwhelming numbers. And they gave just as much as they received. It turned into a slugfest. And it became who wanted it the most. I think the general himself, when he comes and speaks, that he was just as glad as I was that it was over with on the second day. But in true fashion, whoever's left with the field can claim victory. But in my mind, that battle was 2 different battles. Because at the end of the first day, I sent a message to Jefferson Davis Victory is ours, and we will finish this day tomorrow. So at this time, I think it's best that I turn it over to my counterpart and let him give a counter-argument to what I had to say. General?
I don't mind so much following Beauregard when he falls away from the field, but I certainly hate following him when we are speaking. This battle was a battle, as I said earlier, is a battle that should never have been fought, and one I certainly didn't want to fight. Remember, too, that the Battle of Shiloh is one of 5 battles in the Crossroads campaign. It's the tail that wags the dog, because you always hear about Shiloh, but you don't hear so much about Iuka, you don't hear so much about Corinth, you don't hear so much about Hatchie Bridge, the Battle of Davis Bridge or Hatchie Bridge. You got 4 battles involved in the Crossroads campaign. The reason my army is here and I had my headquarters in that house yonder was because we were going to march on Corinth, Mississippi and get that crossroads. 16 square feet of steel rail. Because the Gulf and Mobile and Ohio Railroad ran to Columbus, Kentucky, north and south, connecting the Gulf of Mexico with the Mississippi River north of Memphis, Columbus, Kentucky, about 100 miles, and the west-east railroad, the Memphis and Charleston, connecting Memphis with Charleston, South Carolina, on the Atlantic Ocean. It was the only railroad in the eastern United States that connected the mighty Mississippi with the Atlantic coast, Atlantic Ocean. It was a must-have. And then you get the M&O, the Mobile and Ohio, coming out of Mobile, Alabama, and you got the major priority railroad connecting the Gulf, again with the Mississippi. That crossroads in Corinth, Mississippi, was the most important real estate in America. We had to have it. But then Albert Sidney Johnston had a different agenda. He wanted to keep it. So I am here amassing troops down the Mississippi. We had about 175 steamboats to bring all of our troops. About 37,000 men on the banks there in Pittsburgh landed. I've got Don Carlos Buell coming from Columbia, Tennessee, essentially Nashville area, with about another 40,000. But he's dragging his sword getting here. Because when he gets here, he's going to be under my command. Now, he made it clear Grant was subordinate to me in the old army, and I don't see why he should be superior to me in the present army, and he couldn't get past that. So Don Carlos Buell is in no hurry to get to Savannah, Tennessee, and is in essence turn over his army of the Ohio to blend with the army of the Tennessee and become one unit under my command. And I'm waiting here daily for him to get here. I want to move on Corinth, but now I'm not in a big hurry to get to Corinth. I want to get there, but I can wait for Buell. I've got, as I said, about 37,000 men. And I'm busily training them. Some of my troops had fought at Fort Donelson, had seen the elephant 7 weeks ago. Some of them, not a lot of them, by far. Most of my troops were civilians who just weeks ago were working at home and on the farm or in a business. They were not soldiers. So I felt it's better to spend my time training them in the manual of arms of how to load and fire that weapon instead of digging trenches and building breastworks. Because I didn't think that Sidney Johnston would leave a heavily entrenched, fortified position in Corinth to give me battle in the open. Well, he had a different agenda because he was stung over having lost Fort Donelson and Fort Henry, the Tennessee and the Cumberland Rivers, and lost Nashville, Tennessee. Now his defensive line at the time of Fort Donelson went from the Mississippi River up almost to the Appalachian Mountains, with Bowling Green, Kentucky right in the center. Several hundred-mile defensive line. Well, when Fort Donelson fell and Nashville fell, he had to go down from Bowling Green, all of western Kentucky, fall down through Tennessee, all of middle Tennessee, and all of west Tennessee, and establish his defensive line at the southern border of the state of Tennessee. He lost Kentucky and 2/3 of Tennessee and never fired a shot. People were demanding his dismissal. It's when Jeff Davis said, if somebody had challenged him and said, is Albert Sidney Johnston really a general? We ain't seen it. And Jeff Davis said, well, if General Johnston is not a general, then we have no general. Of course, I side with the prior comment. He never showed me anything. And he was killed too early in the war to have demonstrated his potential, which was held to be bad. But I'm waiting here at the Cherry Mansion, Army training at Pittsburgh Landing, waiting for Don Carlos Buell to come from yonder way. And the pressure building all the time for me, because Johnston's planning on coming up and attacking. He told Beauregard to develop a plan. So I'm spending the day on the battlefield, or what became the battlefield, training, and coming back here every night to meet Buell. Friday night, April the 4th, I was there, some desultory fighting erupted, and we had come back to Pittsburgh Landing to get on a steamboat, my command staff. I hear a lot of shooting and firing going on, it seemed like a mile or two further to the west. We turned around our party and went back. We were met about halfway by Sherman and Colonel McPherson, James McPherson, and they said there's nothing to it. It's just some Rebs out there popping their guns, and we thought it was a reconnaissance in force. Didn't think the whole army was out there because, as I said, I didn't think Johnston would leave a defensive position to get beat out in the open. So we turned our horses around, went back to Pittsburgh Landing, and I was riding one of my favorite mounts, Fox. It was so dark and raining so hard that you really couldn't see your hand in front of your face. We all had to trust our horses. Fox lost his footing and fell on an embankment and caught my left leg under the horse. Now, a horse weighs about 1,500 pounds, and that horse came down heavily on my left leg. My surgeon said if it hadn't been raining for the entire past week, that it would have crushed my leg. But we got on the boat, got back here to the Cherry Mansion in about 45 minutes, and by the time we got back, we had to cut my left boot off my foot. My leg, particularly from the knee down, was almost twice its size. And I couldn't get a boot on, so I was given a crutch, somebody who no longer, unfortunately, needed it, and I was wearing a house shoe on my left foot. I fought the Battle of Shiloh wearing a house shoe on my left foot. So Saturday, April the 5th, General Beauregard referenced, he's thinking that Buell is 3 days away. He got that information when in fact, Buell was on top of Savannah, almost here. Well, I sent my boss, Major General Henry Waver Halleck, the information that they're out there. We think it's a reconnaissance in force. Don't think it's the whole army. But however, if they do attack us, we are prepared. Well, I was wrong. His information that he got about Buell and where his army was wrong. My information that I sent to Henry Halleck was wrong, because in truth, 44,000 Confederate soldiers were just about a mile away or a little further from my lines. So that's how the battle got set up. Now, I had ordered Buell to report to me as soon as he arrived. Now, you hear the term strict orders. Well, in the military, there's no such thing as strict orders. Orders are simply that. And Buell had his orders to report here to me as soon as he arrived. He did not. He got here the night of the 5th and didn't deign to come calling on me. So the morning of the 6th, when I'm in that parlor yonder ways trying to have some breakfast with my staff, I heard that sound of artillery and a lot of it. Because we're about 8 or 9 miles away. And I knew if I could hear the sound of artillery, there was a lot of it. And as it turned out, we had 178 guns in Shiloh. Before it was over, 100,000 men were involved. And that's a lot of gunfire. But now, General Beauregard made an excellent point about Shiloh was really 2 fights, and it was. The first day, when the Confederates rolled us all the way back to the river. Was I surprised? No. I will tell you, they did not surprise me. I had told General Halleck the day before, I know they're out there, and if they attack us, we'll be prepared. Now, I won't play with you and say I wasn't shocked, because I didn't think that that Johnston would leave down there in Corinth and come up and hit me in the open. But he stung. He's got to hit me to restore his reputation. He also wants to hit me before I've got about 80,000 men. So he figures he can hit me before Buell gets here, and he thinks Buell's 3 days away, he'll have the advantage. So, yes, it was a shock. No, it was not a surprise. But they rolled us back almost to the river. If you go out there, you'll see that we were standing on that last line of fence. We just about had our boots in the water. Now, Buell would like to, and General Beauregard obliquely referred to this. Did you like that, General, obliquely? He obliquely referred to this in good taste, that Buell thinks he saved my bacon. He did not. The first day's battle, we held well, but we were rolled back. I wrote after the battle that I was most impressed with the Confederate soldier. He showed acts of valor and courage that I had never seen before. They hurled themselves repeatedly against our positions with no apparent regard for their own well-being. They fought savagely and fought well. They are a worthy opponent. And I had a very healthy respect for the Confederate soldier when I left that battlefield. And so did everybody else in the Army, in the Federal Army at that battlefield. But we came back slowly and gave slowly after the initial onslaught. Buell had gotten here and was began moving troops across the river. By the end of the first day, before nightfall, as General Beauregard referred, we called a halt to the fighting. It got dark. There had been about a regiment or so of the Army of the Ohio to get across on my side of the river where the battle was. And there were 3, well, I'll tell you this, you decide for yourselves if I was saved by John Carlos Buell and the Army of the Ohio. The Army of the Tennessee suffered 7,000 casualties the first day. We lost 7,000 killed and wounded. Probably more than that. Buell had 3 casualties, 2 killed and 1 wounded. I had 7,000. Now, who saved who? Who did what? But overnight, we moved nearly 20,000 men across that river. Now, if you have any affiliation with the United States Navy, thank you. because the Navy did a tremendous job of ferrying 20,000 troops across that river overnight. So the second day, when daylight came, we had a whole army there that wasn't there the day before. So Beauregard has not had any reinforcement, and he lost about 7,000 or 8,000 killed and wounded as well that first day. So when daylight broke and we resumed the fighting, we hit them first. Then I had the tremendous numerical advantage, and it was a reversal of the first day. We pushed them back to pretty much where we were the day before. The lines were the same. And then the battle drew to a close. Now, a stinger at the end of this would be that I wasn't sure if Beauregard had actually retreated. I knew that Johnston had been killed, and I had the same question that General Beauregard had. Why was an Army commander leading a regimental charge and putting himself in that much danger, which in his case was the ultimate danger, and he was killed? He should have been, lead from the front is one thing, the Army commander, a 5-star general, he needs to be behind the troops, not in front of them, and it was the cause of General Johnston's demise. But I wondered, but as it turned out, there was troops that were attacking the Hornet's Nest, I believe, General, and they had said, we ain't going again. Because that field, Duncan Field, in front of the Hornet's Nest, that's one of the fields that I was referring to when I said that you could walk entirely across that field on the diagonal, stepping only on the dead bodies of men, your feet never touching the ground. It was carpeted with bodies. And by that time in the afternoon of the first day, those Confederate soldiers were saying, we're not going across that open field again. No, sir. And that's when Johnston, in a courageous move, said, I'll lead him. And he got in front of them. And he was killed. But the second day was a completely different day, and we pushed Beauregard back. I sent Sherman after Beauregard to probe. I had to know, was it a retreat or was it restaging for a counterattack? Well, Sherman had fallen timbers not too far south of the battlefield, ran into Colonel Bedford Forrest, and he in a rather spirited encounter. And so I would have you know that there was one time in the war that Bedford Forrest and Sherman were actually fighting each other on the same field, and it happened here. And I understand that Forrest leveled his revolver and fired a shot at General Sherman, and it fell on an empty chamber. Now, even if that's not true, it's a great story. I don't know that it ain't true, but I ain't saying it is true. However, Sherman and Forrest were on the same field, facing each other at one time. He came back to me and he said, it is a retreat. It was an orderly, well-done retreat. There was no skedaddling. Those men fought well. They fought well. And we did not pursue. Now, I could have ordered Don Carlos Buell to pursue Beauregard. I did not, because I was sensitive about outranking him, and I knew he changed under my command. They had just joined me, and I was reticent to order Buell to pursue Beauregard. Also, as Sherman so articulately put it, we had had 2 days of their Southern hospitality. And we felt to a man that if they would leave us alone, we would leave them alone. And we let Beauregard. And something else as I bring my remarks to a close, and General Beauregard joins me if you have any questions. keep in mind that the Battle of Shiloh was a battle that changed everything. You know, the expression, nobody in the South ever smiled after Shiloh. Nobody in the North ever smiled either. Here, the battle was fought largely by civilians. Now, some of those men had seen the elements, some of them. By far, most of the men who fought here at Shiloh, both sides, were civilians who had not fired a shot in anger. And yet they both stood toe-to-toe for 36 hours and gave what they got. They performed admirably and are to be praised, both sides, for the valor they showed. Because they were civilians, they were not yet soldiers, they were not yet combat veterans. So keep that in mind about the nature of the man who fought here at Shiloh. Shiloh was a bloodbath. 23,746 men killed and wounded. 23,746 men killed and wounded. 4,000 dead on the field. There had never been that many dead men on a field of combat on the North American continent to that time. That's more men killed and wounded in 36 hours than were killed and wounded in all three wars this country had been involved in. The Revolution, the War of 1812, the Mexican War. All three wars totaled 23,215. But in 36 hours, there were that many and 500 more that we know of. It was astounding. The country came to its knees when the casualty list came out. And because this was a war fought for patriotism and principle, for cause and country, whichever way you saw patriotism, whichever cause you chose to support, every man on that field, particularly that early in the war, was there because he wanted to be there. No conscription, no draft. Every man on that field wanted to be on that field. Because of that, you had every level of society, from the poorest to the wealthiest, from a man who couldn't read and write to college professors and doctors and lawyers. Every level of society was on that field of Shiloh, and because of that, the casualty lists were spread throughout society. Across the country, 4 out of every 10 houses in America, 40% of the households in America, and that's Atlantic to Pacific, Mexico to Canada, 4 out of every 10 homes had somebody killed or wounded at Pittsburgh Landing. That's astounding. We even had Nebraska troops fighting here. So think of the carnage that happened on that field. And when the war was over, Shiloh was only the 8th or 9th, depending on what list you're looking at, battle with the losses in the war. Gettysburg being number 1. Shiloh ranks 8th or 9th, as bloody as it was. General, what would you say in conclusion?
I would say the night before the second day, how horrific this battle was. As the Confederate troops were camping, they could hear the moans, the screams, the whinnying of the wounded horses, the nightmares they must have gone through that night. And it was reported, and as my pickets looked across the field, they said you could see the glow of the bodies. Picture that in your mind. Men screaming out on the field that stayed there overnight. You'd hear some moaning and groaning, those praying, both blue and gray. the horses whinnying, the carnage, the smell of death. The angel of death had collected a lot more than what was expected that day.
And a driving, downpour, frost around rain started.
And all I could do while I was working throughout the night was sit there and cry for poor boys. Because this was my army. Johnson was in command, but it was my army. 48,000 men that I used my name, my reputation to gather for him at Corinth. I even gave it its name, the Army of Mississippi. And to send them out. Because when we left out to start that battle, I told the men, go forth. You're back home in Tennessee. You're here. Your families, your wives, your sweethearts are watching. Let us liberate the state of Tennessee. Those men fought with such valor and ferociousness. To sit back and to listen all night and that rain on those men. We could not go out and get them. That's more than anything in stone. And knowing come the next day when we go across that field again, we're probably going to be charging across those fields.
Well, in conclusion, myself, before we entertain some questions, I would like to tell you, the night after night fell and the rain started, it's just a downpour. I had gone into my building there by the river and get out of the rain. It had become a field hospital. I couldn't stay there. So I went out in the rain. Sherman approached me out of the darkness and he said, well, Grant, we had the devil's own day today, haven't we? And I said, yeah, but look at me no more. He said, well, I better get back to my men. And I said, best you do. We'll attack the first light. The army that attacks first will carry the day, and Beauregard is going to have to get up mighty early in the morning to attack me before I attack him. And the second day began shortly thereafter. We got any questions anybody like to ask? Got Jeff, got one for you, Jim, yeah. What, Jeff? Take a couple.
I've heard General Beauregard headed to the Louisiana lottery following the war. You, sir, would go to become president.
Well, I have no political ambitions at this time.
I would head the lottery. I was accustomed to a certain lifestyle. It was very unfashionable after the war that a Confederate general would live in such lavish, wealthy attire. But I was used to that to start off with. So I didn't see anything wrong going back to the way it was. I was rich before, I'll be rich again.
General Beauregard,
Yes,
you stated that at the beginning of the battle that too many troops were sent off to the right, too many regiments were sent to the right. Didn't you believe at the beginning that the end of the left flank of the 6th Division was the left flank of the whole army, and then when it was discovered Stewart's brigade was there, you thought it was a division and that's why so many were sent at them?
on the right, I stated that was the original plan, my right, which was to separate Grant from the river and so forth. That's where the majority of the troops were being sent. The left, my where we were having so much more success, it was actually passing the right flank. That was mostly Louisiana troops on the left flank.
But were you surprised that Stewart was there?
Not really, not really. I was shocked and surprised that the right was not keeping up with the left. And come to find out, that's where Johnson became so preoccupied about the center. If Johnson had just gone around the center, the Hornets' Nest, like I had advised him, there's too much time was being spent there. I told him if he didn't go around those troops, we would mop them up later. That would allow Grant to establish a new line of defense.
Which you did.
And actually, that's what saved the day, what saved his army, was that line of defense, that last line that he had.
The repeated attacks against the Hornets' Nest gave me time to set up my last line of defense. If they had just encapsulated and then come around, it would have been a different story.
So when Johnson dies, best way to put it was, I wasn't going to waste any time on the center. I just brought 60 guns and just blew them away. And I think about the time the third round on the 60th gun, those federal troops there, they didn't have enough. They decided to surrender. And I was already sending troops on them. Now, what some people don't realize, that at the end of the day, there were still attacks going on. General Force, at the time Colonel Force, was trying to find me on the battlefield. He couldn't find me. He had found a route close to the river that would have flanked General Grant's defensive line. Think of the ironic twist. If he had found me on the field, we could have separated him from the river at that time. But by then, so many reinforcements were coming in, I personally do not think it would have made a difference, especially after I surveyed the field and saw the ravines, how much it would have taken to move around. But there was an opening on the right. Some people will criticize that I halted too soon. You can say all you want to. After all the blood that had been shed that first day, and both sides were exhausted, like I said, it was a slugfest. Who wanted it more? I think I did the right thing to call for a halt. Because it's too dark to even see your own hand in front of your face. And you got to also understand at that time, a lot of my troops were wearing blue, especially those in Louisiana. Even some of his troops were wearing gray from Illinois. Think about that early stage of the war, the confusion. I mean, we had some of my own troops firing on the Louisiana boys, and they finally had to turn their coats inside out where it would show white. And they said, who are those boys going into battle wearing their death clothes? The only reason why they knew they were from Louisiana when they finally saw the Pelican flag. So here, early in the war, would you not say, General, this was a test for the mettle of those men? Who was determined? And you think, both of them untrained, green troops. It's a testament to them and their will. I may also add, if you could bring some of those voices back right now, they would tell you, a lot of them after that battle said, why are we fighting this? This war started in the East. We're Westerns. And a lot of them after that, it really changed everybody's attitude. So,
Yeah, Shiloh was a turning point. What you did was very good. Sure. We're going to end at this point. Mary Ann's going to come up and talk about Cherry Mansion. Thank you.
I just want to add my welcome to the ones you've already got. history. I forget that. I mean, I walk on these hallowed grounds every day, so I forget that it's special to people that love this history. I'm not going to talk right now because y'all may need to stretch your legs and walk around. I'll be around if you have house questions. These guys will be around if you have more questions for them. But I just wanted to welcome you to our yard. I'm sorry we don't do house tours anymore. This went from a tour house to a grandma house, pet hotel house. So there's just no way to whip it into shape anymore, but it's a fun house, and I love living here. It's a constant problem house, but we gotta love it, and we do. But anyway, I'll be about to answer any questions, and I'm so glad y'all are all here. I hope you enjoyed it. Stretch your legs, wander around, and we'll be here.